Thank you for joining us here on this podcast, on this Zoom call podcast. With me is Ching-Ching Ni. She is the editor-in-chief of the Chinese edition of the New York Times. Thank you very much, Ching-Ching.
Great to be here, Bill.
So the focus of this series is to talk about diversity in journalism in the Asian context. Now, you're in Beijing, correct?
Yes.
Right. And can you tell me a little bit about what the Chinese edition of the New York Times is? Is it simply the New York Times in Mandarin?
Good question. I've been doing this for a long time. I started out in journalism covering China for the Los Angeles Times. And back then, there is no Chinese edition of American journalism, as far as I know. And so the New York Times now is able to publish key stories and in Chinese is really something that I am very proud to be part of. Basically, we curate some of the best of New York Times journalism, but mostly stories that are connected to China. And so we pick and choose every day, and we try to present that to the Chinese language speaking audience, which is a huge audience. However, it's very difficult to reach them these days, given the various censorship that is ongoing here in China. So, but it is still an incredible opportunity to share the best of New York Times journalism with the Chinese language speaking world. So that's basically, in a nutshell, what we do.
Now, how long have you been in this role?
I have been in this role about 5 years now. Yeah.
Well, and could you briefly tell your story about how you got to this position?
Yeah, so I jumped the gun a little bit. I said I started my career at the LA Times in China. Well, there was a lot of that came before that because it's not exactly easy to get to that point. But the context of being in China, I started my career in China at the LA Times here. But this was like not an easy thing to get to that point. And for our younger audience who are just starting out in the business, I want to share a little bit of how I got here. Because a lot of people want to come to China. A lot of people want to be a reporter in China. It's still really, really difficult. I myself never thought I would become a journalist because I was born in China and grew up in the US in California in the 80s. And, it took me a long time to learn English. My mother hardly spoke any English and she was a single parent. And we didn't have any journalism in our lives. And in fact, my mother, my family, they're all musicians. So and I'm the only person without any musical talent. So I really had to find something else to do with my life. And but in America, if you didn't speak English, you kind of like are not going to be successful in life. And, we didn't speak English for a long time. And so everything was extra hard for me and for my family. So how did I go from that to, journalism? It's one of those things I say, there are people in your lives that come in to help you in unexpected ways. So when I finally made it to college, I was a very quiet person. I never wanted to speak up. I was always afraid I would say the wrong thing. But of course, I still had a lot of opinions, right? And it's not true that I don't talk a lot amongst my friends. And one of these sort of moments for me was that, in college, like my first year or second year, there's this guy that I barely knew. He heard me talking all the time. And he every day he would say, why don't you write something? Why don't you write something? And I was like, stop nagging me. Stop nagging me. You don't know me and you don't know my fears. And so, but he kept saying that every day, in the cafeteria line, why don't you write something, write something? And so one day I did, I wrote something and it was an incredible moment for me. I guess I realized that my language didn't have to be perfect, but I had to have something to say. I think back then that was a really profound moment for me to get up the courage to write something and have it be read. So that's kind of how I learned what journalism is and how I might be a part of it. But that's a long time from that to like getting a job, in journalism. And that was just college, right? It isn't, you can write whatever you want. And just to write it was like an act of bravery and courage in itself for me, right? So college is hard. College, I still didn't know what I want. Write something doesn't mean I know what I want to do for the rest of my life. So what did I do after that? God, that was a long time ago. So it really is a long time ago. Let me think. Okay, so journalism, how did I get into journalism? So I have this unique experience. I wanted to tell my story and the stories of the people around me, but I didn't know how to do that. So I went to, after college, I went to graduate school in international affairs because I got a fellowship and it was free. So I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And I figured if I couldn't find a job, I might as well just go to, grad school. It's a job. It's free. Let me just do that. And a lot of people probably do that. But for me, I learned very quickly that it's not what I wanted to do. It was just so difficult for me to get into the subject. And very luckily and coincidentally, I took a class at the journalism school at Columbia. And it just blew my mind because I did not know that there was such a thing. I didn't really know how journalism works, right? I didn't know that you can, spend your life going out there and getting stories and telling stories about people and places that maybe only you cared about or no one else would know about unless you told them about it. And that, school was all about going out to New York and doing that and bringing it back and having people teach you how to shape that story and tell that story in a compelling way. And I just thought, oh my God, this is what I want to do with my life. This is, my gosh, somebody's going to train me to do that. So I ended up taking out a big loan to support myself through journalism school because, as you know, they don't give you a lot of scholarships in journalism schools. And so it's a lot of money. It's like $30,000, something biggest loan I've ever taken in my life because, we grew up poor. I didn't have any money and it was all scholarships for everything that I've done. And this was like, I got to do this for myself. And I did it. And it was the best investment I ever made. Yes. And then what happened? So after that, it's easy to get into school. It's a lot harder to get your first job. And I was very lucky, talking about diversity. I am a big beneficiary of, diversity because because my background, although I love journalism, it doesn't mean I have a lot of experience in it. I didn't have any clips. I didn't have any, internships. And so it would be very difficult for someone like me to get in the door of a major news organization in America. But I was very lucky to get into a very competitive and very wonderful minority journalism training program called METPRO. And it's run by the Los Angeles Times, by the then Times Mirror Company. And it was a year-long training program. It really changed my life because, without that training program, I wouldn't have been able to get into the industry and sort of as soon as I did and learn so much and do so much. But I have to tell you, my very first full-time job after this training program from the LA Times, it's kind of dramatic because I got my dream job was to come back to New York, to work in New York for a big metropolitan newspaper. And doesn't anybody want to do that, right? And of course, I just couldn't believe that I got my first job at New York Newsday. And I worked at New York Newsday for 1 week. I wrote one story and they killed the paper. And I was the last person they hired, and I would have been the first person out the door. And so, yeah. And you would think that I would have learned from that. It's a huge blinking light. Get out of the business. Get out of the business. Oh, no. Right? But I was like, what's going on? I didn't have a plan B. I didn't know what to do with my life. This was like I put all my eggs in this one basket.
Mm.
And so I was very lucky because Newsday had a sister publication called Long Island Newsday. Well, not sister, they are the same company. They had an edition on Long Island, and they were able to take me into, I was able to move to that job, you know, because a lot of people left. And it was a moment where it was a moment where a lot of people saw the writing on the wall and basically fled the business, right? The guy that sat next to me, like he just booked a flight to Africa or something. Like he wanted to, finally, this was a moment for him to do what he really wanted to do with his life, right? And I had just gotten started. I didn't know what else to do, so I went to Long Island. It wasn't my dream job, but I learned so much, right? The local journalism, the local news, the cop speed, you know, I covered education, police, town hall, town government, immigration, and a lot of breaking news, things that, you know, we don't think is glamorous, but is really sort of the foundation of what, you know, the much bigger journalism is all about. So I was very, very grateful that I had that opportunity to continue. And basically, that is how I launched my career, not these like quick breaks, but this sort of steady, you know, go and do your, you know, town hall meeting, go to your late night board meetings and, you know, explain what is going on in these smaller communities in America. So I really appreciate that experience. So that's what got me eventually overseas back to China.
Was working. Sure, absolutely. So yes, what did eventually get you back to China? You said that's what got you there.
Right. So so when I was at Newsday on Long Island, this was also probably helpful to other young journalists who are trying to break into the business. You know, when I say, like, you know, do focus on the training wherever you are, whether it's at a small, although there's like not that many smaller papers out there, right? And also, my gosh, Newsday was not a smaller paper in any sense of the word. But what I mean is that a lot of people are eager to jump to their dream job right away. And maybe in this day and age, you just have to go out and do that. The circumstances are very different now. But for me, how I did it was I needed to make sure and that everyone knew that I had a dream, and it's to go back to China, to cover China, right? So that they know that this is what you want to do. And then the second thing is that do everything you can to show them that you're willing to go the extra mile. Not just that you want to get there, but how are you going to get there? Yeah. So a couple things that I did when I was young, and no one would consider sending me overseas, is that I sent myself in the sense that, you know, for my summer vacation, for example, it was a Hong Kong handover in 1997, how a long time ago. And so that I happened to be there that summer. And so that when our official correspondent needed help, everybody was desperate for help. And that was the biggest story of the year. And it was very hard to get translators and assistants because everybody has been taken up. And I happened to be there. And of course, I was able to help out and, you know, get on the front page of one of the biggest stories of the year, right? And so another time, I also on summer vacation, I went back to China to see my grandmother, who is from a small village. I have two grandmothers, one from the city, one from the village, and I never really got to know my village side of the family. And I was supposed to go there and see her, but she died the day I arrived. And so I ended up spending my whole vacation stuck in this little village with my extended family on this very like unexpected funeral ritual that lasted like 10 days or something like that. Really long, like a long stretch where we couldn't go anywhere but stuck and learn. So I took the time to learn all about my extended family, and I turned that into a long magazine piece for Newsday. And so I think that piece really changed the way my editors saw me, you know, as the young kid who sent out to the police shooting or whatever. It was something small, not a police shooting small, but, you know, breaking news. and hard news rather than something longer, more thoughtful, and from overseas, right? And so these are sort of ways that you put yourself out there. You not only raise your hand, but you show them, you know, what you can do. And so, yeah, I was young and I was really hungry. So those are good things to have when you're young and, you know, when you need to build experience and clips. So because I kept doing things like that, when one day when the Los Angeles Times was looking for someone to for their Shanghai bureau at the time, you know, a lot of people remembered me and you know, asked me to apply. And I was very lucky, you know, after a lot. And by the way, you know, there's so many AAJA connections. You know, I didn't. I will say, you know, if you ask me, you know, why AAJA, how important is AAJA? You know, AAJA has been there for me at every step of my career. Really, you know, like one of my biggest interviews happened at an AAJA convention. And all these meetings that you wish you could have, that you wouldn't have an opportunity to have, happen at some AAJA event. And when I was in college, right, not college, when I was at the journalism school, you know, I sort of glide over it like it's so easy. It was horribly hard for me. And I almost couldn't make it. You know, I loved it. It doesn't mean it loved me, right? I love journalism, but journalism was hard as hell, man. It didn't love me back. I couldn't get it, like, you know, yeah. And also everybody in my class was so good at it already. They all have experience in the field, and you know, they know what they were doing. And I was brand new. Like, I hardly ever read the newspaper before that. I'm sorry, it's just true. Like, when you're disadvantaged or you come from a, you know, immigrant family, we don't spend money to buy the newspaper that we don't understand, right? So I don't even know what a story is, like what a newspaper article structure is, what should be in it, and how it should sound. So can you imagine? I'm competing with these other super competitive people who've already had great internships. And so, yeah, it beat me to death, right? And I didn't really know if I could make it. And then that is where I met my first AAJA member and mentor and friend for life. Yeah, so her name is Wendy Lin. I love her, and she's still my friend. She lives in New York still. And, you know, she was my adjunct professor, and she saw how I struggled. She helped me. She held me by the hand. She told me not to give up. And she introduced me to a community of other AAJA members, right? Like-minded people who, you know, really was there to support me. I went there every weekend, like every month we had a meeting. I always went there. Wow, my God, I can't believe there's all these other people like me, although they weren't probably struggling the way I was struggling. But, you know, it was so great to meet them and to know that there is support when I need it, and for them to like whisper opportunities to me, you know, give me advice on things that, you know, really to catch up on, you know, all the things, opportunities that I didn't have before. My fellow AAJA members really, you know, made up the difference. And I feel like so enriched by my experience of participating as a young student, you know, just like opening my eyes to everything, listening to everything. And then later on to be able to work with these, you know, some of the more experienced colleagues. It was incredible. So, yeah, so I got to China because, you know, along the way at every AAJA meeting, somebody will pull me and say, hey, you need to meet this person, you need to meet that person, you need to go hear this, you need to hear that. And then finally there was a meeting, you know, a chance to meet the foreign editor of the Los Angeles Times. And that meeting happened at AAJA, and he happens to be one of the biggest supporters of AAJA, Simon Lee, you know, financially and in terms of his time, energy, you know, to groom, to cultivate, to mentor young journalists like myself. You know, like he hires all these Pulitzer Prize winning experienced journalists, and then he would talk to someone like me, because AAJA gave him a platform and made me an opportunity to meet someone like him, you know, so we can engage and he can believe in me, because there is the power of the whole organization behind me saying, hey, you know, believe in people like ChingChing Ni. It's true. It's true. It's amazing.
And so from there, then you went to the New York Times, or?
So no, I mean, my life is kind of long by now. Once upon a time I was young, but so I covered China for the Los Angeles Times for nearly a decade. And I didn't expect that to last that long either. So I'm so grateful. It's like such a life-changing experience to come back to China and cover China. But I have to say, in terms of advice, you have to look at the long history of your life, but the long trajectory of your career. I was very lucky to have my dream job very early on. Early on for me, because these days very young journalists are coming out to Asia doing an amazing job, and boy, I'm so glad to meet them and see them doing great work. But for me, the journey was a lot longer and harder because of where I had started from. So so after being actually working out of China, and I started to feel like I wanted a change, and part of it is that I don't know if I should share. When I left China, there was I was covering one of the toughest stories, probably my career, which was the Sichuan earthquake right before the Olympics. So it was such a contrast that year in 2008. You have this great big party of China coming out for the Olympics. Then you have this sort of national tragedy of this earthquake that killed all these children. And after a while, the excitement just of telling stories, it was starting to wear out for me, and I was very traumatized by the earthquake coverage and seeing all the children, the dead children. And I was also a young mother then. I just couldn't handle it anymore, and I thought I needed a break. And you will come to that point in your career where you need to reflect on, what you want to do next. Some people can do this for their entire careers, and some people are very lucky that they can do that. And other people must make a choice about, what is it that you want to do. And I had to think long and hard about what I wanted to do. So I was very lucky I had a chance to go back to the States, do a fellowship to sort of think and sort of reset. And one of the amazing things that happened, just to cut a little bit further down the road, is that I found this great opportunity and very rare opportunity to come back to China again, but in a completely different capacity as an academic at a Chinese journalism school. I was hired to teach, but I ended up being promoted to associate dean and running global programming, taking students around the world, doing amazing things I never thought I would get to do. That was a really important turning point in my career, because for the longest time, I understand that working for an American newspaper means that I am telling stories about China to an American audience in English. That was very clear. This is why, I said, well, I can never imagine that there will be a Chinese edition of the New York Times, because when I was working at the LA Times, nobody, could read what I write, right? So it's a one-way conversation, not a conversation, it's a one-way. I'm writing about you for them. But being someone who's born in China, who is really both of China and of America, I really wanted there to be a conversation. And it was not possible when everything was in English, when everything was dominated by American media. And so to come back to China as an academic, I really saw myself as helping groom the next generation of Chinese journalists, so they can go out there and tell their own stories, right? And I thought that was really important to me, that I got to do that. Of course, instead of teaching them, I felt like they had a lot more to teach me. And that was a moment in my career, a turning point in my career, where I went from a print journalist, like I told you, I don't know how to do anything except write, and not even that well at that. And for many years, I thought, and suddenly I entered this world where these young people knew everything, multimedia, like all the stuff that we're doing now, they were doing and teaching me. I didn't even have a smartphone back then. My first smartphone was when you work in China, you got to be on Weibo, WeChat. I didn't even know what those things were. Okay. And you have to engage, you have to build your brand, you have to do public speaking, you have to sell your ideas to the students, the young generation of Chinese. They don't just take it, you have to pitch it to them, you have to convince them. And you have to manage people. I had a staff. I was running, I was, sitting in meetings where I'm often the only woman. Like all these things prepared me for the moment when the New York Times needed somebody to lead their Chinese operation, to turn the amazing journalism that they do into Chinese language, right? So I think that if I hadn't gone on this detour to Chinese academia, I don't think I could really take on this current role, which is way more complex. The stakes are way higher than anything I've ever done before. So yeah.
It's an amazing story, really. I mean, you found mentors along the way and created your own opportunities along the way, and that's a pretty powerful combination.
Thank you.
And it's fantastic to see. You did mention that you were the only woman in the room in that one case. I'm just curious, what obstacles do you think, if any, that you've encountered as a woman in your field, or as a woman in your field in Asia in particular? Anything in that regard?
Yeah. So this is interesting. Like in Asia, of course, in any positions of power, in any boardroom, in any, important meeting, I learned that I'm usually the only woman, or one of two or three, when there's a huge room of people. And I think that when I was a reporter, I don't really get to see because I'm not really in the room where it happens, right? But I got to see this, and I think it was not just to see it. I didn't really know. It was very difficult to know what to say oftentimes, how to make your voice heard. And that's also the case throughout my career, right? It seems like it's easy to be vocal, but actually it's not. And in Asia, it's a lot harder. When I was a reporter, oftentimes if I show up at something, people always assume, if there are other men around, or especially white men around, they just always assume that I'm the assistant, right? Or the translator. And, even more recently, when I'm the editor-in-chief of the New York Times, and I'm invited to go do a speech at some university. And, we go in to meet with the dean, to chit chat. And the dean would only talk to the only man on my team. And he's a white man, right? And he would only look at him. He would only address him. And like, I'm not even there. So what do I do?
Today?
Sorry?
Even today?
Yes. This was like a year or two ago, right?
Wow.
Well, yes. This is, I think that they didn't bother to figure out who the speaker is or whatever, right? Or that they didn't think because there's a white man in the room, they just automatically speak to him. This is like, and if it's not a white man, it's probably a man they would prefer to talk to. And that's, some of it is cultural. They, when a man speaks to you, they don't want to look you in the eye. They would look at a man, they can't look at you. Or that they, sometimes when I show up as an American correspondent for Los Angeles Times or whatever, they expect, they'll look at my institution's name and they look up at me and then look again. It's like, where's my white man? I want a white man. Why is this Asian woman standing in front of me? You get that all the time. Right? You have to say, well, I'm Chinese American. I constantly have to qualify. Why do I have to qualify? I am what I am. I deserve to be here. So don't question me. Okay. But here in this world, you constantly I don't have to bring my passport. I mean, that's the number one thing. Like, I used to live in the government compound here as a foreign correspondent, right? And I can't walk into my own home without a passport, because they let all the white people in. They let everyone in. They let people of all races in. They just won't let any Chinese people in. They won't let anybody with a Chinese face in. So I have to constantly bring my passport, because my face is not enough, or my face, I can't get through the door with my face, whereas a white person their face is their passport. And so that's a constant thing, even probably today. Although the times have changed a little bit, there's a lot of nationalism against foreigners now, but that's a different kind of level of complexity that is operating here in China. Yeah.
Those are, those are amazing stories, but also fully expected, sadly, right?
Yeah.
But
yeah. Well, this is China. Yeah. So it's fascinating. I mean, these are the things that. So this is why you need diversity in the newsroom, so you can have people like me tell you stories like that, right? If the LA Times and New York Times only send white people out here, they wouldn't have these stories to be able to share with you. So we experience something totally different here, and if we weren't here, you wouldn't know about these things. So I'm glad I can help.
Well, what do you make of the state of diversity in the newspaper industry? Because it has traditionally been white, male, and higher educated, right? Kind of three different things going on there. What do you make of the state of diversity in the industry right now?
So in the US and China is a little bit different story. I think in the US is an ongoing challenge. I think that, the program that I was in is incredible, but why aren't there more programs like that, right? And how many people that they bring in the door actually stay inside and grow and thrive? That's a big question, right? It's one thing to bring people in. It's another to retain them, to really make sure that they grow, that they contribute. I think that, probably without an organization like AAJA, I don't know if I would have grown or I would have stayed. If I didn't see like-minded people, if I didn't see other people believing in me, I don't know if I have the courage to do this alone. So I think that America has a long ways to go in terms of diversity. But in terms of my experience here in Asia, it's very interesting. That when I was teaching journalism, and the one thing that's really funny is almost all my students are young women, right? The young women who choose journalism are young people who choose journalism are most likely to be women. But yet, when you go out into the boardrooms, right, into the leadership positions, all the top editors, they're almost all men, right? And so the idea here is not so much a racial issue, but a gender issue, and a serious one, because, a lot of young women, there's just no way for them to make it to positions of power in their newsrooms. And also, it's really funny, my students told me they don't even know why they're in journalism school, because, the way they, they like me, they didn't even know what journalism was, and they had to pick something in high school, and then they ended up, studying journalism. And the only journalism they ever saw was like maybe CCTV or some kind of broadcasting. That to them is like the end of journalism, right? And so they don't, and these day and age, to be a journalist, it's low paying, high risk. And one of the things that the young women always told me is that you can't find a husband.
Oh.
So, because people don't want you to have a high risk, low paying, like labor intensive job, right? That doesn't have a future, right? So and so for them, that's a real turnoff. So these really smart young women who acquire all these skills, they are not likely to go into the business in any serious way. That's a big problem, right? So for me, the challenge in the industry is, how do we attract, right, the brightest minds of today, and how do we make sure that they have room to grow and to contribute? So, that's a huge challenge.
Well, do you have an idea for a solution there, or something that you're doing at the New York Times right now that is helping to overcome some of those difficulties?
So, here in China, I did what I could. I went into academia, but it's a lot harder here to do anything on your own. right? I can train students. So I brought, this is where I connect the dots, right? Bring my students together with my AAJA community, right? I try to introduce them to, our conventions, our N3 con, our AAJA regular meetings and various workshops to give them any and all opportunities that they may not have if I hadn't introduced it to them, just like when I was coming up, right? And but I really think that each person individually has a responsibility to pull someone up who are struggling or who needs that one opportunity. And then we need organizations like AAJ, right? We can't do this alone. We need the power of the organization. We need a diversity of people who support us, people like you, people like me, who believe in the importance of this, because you can't count on all the editors in the newsrooms to do this. We speak much louder with the community, with an organization. And then we need to show them, look at how far we have come, and look at all the people that we've supported who have come through this. And now, AAJA, even, now that AAJA has an Asia chapter, it's incredible. We're able to really bring on the smartest young people in Asia who are bilingual, who really understands the story, who understand Asia, and who are trained in the West or have connections from both worlds. These are the people that we need to bring into the industry so that we are not always listening only to the stories of, very talented white colleagues who are discovering Asia for the first time, or, as they say, oh, fresh eyes. That's great that you have fresh eyes, but we also need, firsthand experiences and people who really understand, because they are deeply steeped in this culture and this history.
Well, I moved to Singapore 6 years ago and got involved with AAJA because famously the joke is you can be Asian American or a journalist, and any of them will do. So at least I qualify as an American to be in the group. And from the amount of energy and expertise and knowledge and talent that I've encountered in meeting people through the AAJA network has just been incredible. And it's exciting to be around, right? To be around people who show so much promise and are delivering every day on that promise. It's really a wonderful experience.
It's great. Yes.
Yeah.
I agree.
So for one last item, just to broaden it out a little bit more to the industry as a whole, which the journalism industry has been in a state of crisis for a long, long time, it seems, but it just keeps on coming. I wonder if you have any thoughts about the future of the industry as a whole, and either good trends or not so good trends that you might see.
Yeah, I'm very worried. I'm very worried for someone whose first job lasted only 1 week. Yes. I've been worried for 25 years, right? And we should be, right? We should be. And when I was younger, I couldn't do more, right? When I was younger, I was trying to make sure that I get through the door. And now we need to make sure that the building stands for the younger people behind us, right? And I'm not sure that we can make sure. I mean, I'm not sure because, since I started in this business, how many hundreds of newsrooms have closed around the country, just in the United States, not to mention the rest of the world? How many thousands of journalists have lost their jobs? And how do you encourage young people to go into a dying business? These are serious questions. You can't just say, hey, we need you. You need to serve us. You need to serve the higher calling. Young people have to make a living. They have to support their families. Not everybody can afford to have a noble cause, right? These are serious questions. But I don't have answers. I think the most important thing is that we keep asking these questions instead of ignoring them. Like when I was going into the business, like I was running into a burning building. Like I just closed my eyes, run in, right? Now that I'm older, I can't do that because I'm not alone anymore, right? I have children. I have a whole young generation of people behind me. I want to encourage my own daughter to go into journalism. And I want to be able to say that this is something that, that has real promises. I don't want to sacrifice her because I had a dream. it needs to be her dream, and she needs to understand how important it is. And then she and all the young people coming up, you guys need to figure out the solution, right? The world belongs to you. So you guys know all the gadgets and technologies and all the new things that we never heard of, right? I'm doing a job that I never heard of, like when I was starting out, and I have to learn quickly. And not all of us can learn so quickly, but I'm trying. We are all trying. And we want to work with you, and together, let's create a vision for a new tomorrow that is not grounded on the foundation of a dying industry from before, right? We need to come up with something new and be hopeful. And I guess, if this is your last question, I want to end on a hopeful note, in the sense that, yes, there's terrible things that are happening. Yes, the industry is dying. Yes, there's just like protests all over the world because the world is so unfair. But we also live in one of the most exciting times of our lives, of the world, and those of us who are in Asia, who are in China, this is such an incredible opportunity to cover and to understand one of the biggest stories in the world. And this moment, of the pandemic, of crisis, social crisis, and all these things that I thought, my gosh, only my parents, my grandparents' generations go through these huge upheavals that I only read about in books, right? But we are going through them right now in real time. And you can record it all on your phone. It's incredible, right? So you don't need the New York Times. You don't need the LA Times. There will be people who serve those media, huge, traditional outlets. But you can pick up your phone, just like I'm telling my daughter, my teenage daughter, pick up your phone, record what's happening in your world right now, today. This is how you change the world. And because we're stuck at home, even she's learning to do that, because she likes to read books. She wasn't interested. Not all young people like technology. But you know what? We all have to adapt. We all have to learn on the spot, and we all are responsible for coming up with solutions, and we can't just count on other people to do that for us. How's that for an answer?
That's wonderful. Ching-Ching Ni, editor-in-chief of the Chinese edition of the New York Times, thank you so much for your time and your insights and your inspirations
Thank you.
for all
Great
of us.
to be here. Thank you so much.